52 with the podcast industry in America, the Torres Sports Podcast. It is late Sunday, March 10th, 2024, people. Early Monday, if you're listening on podcast, potentially 2024, March 11th, 2024. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great day. And let me just say this. Sometimes, you spend a whole day planning an episode, and then something crazy happens and the whole thing gets blown up. So we were going to lead with all of the big news of the final week of men's college basketball today, and we will get to all of it. But we are coming on live. We do this show every Sunday night live at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And guess what happened about 35 minutes before we came on air? The wild South Carolina LSU women's brawl. Me and producer Matt were just scrambling to get going here, but we are going to lead with the women's brawl. From there, we will take a quick break. We will talk Kyle Filipowski. We will talk beyond that, some of the other results from the weekend. We'll talk a little Kentucky, Tennessee. We'll talk a little UConn just steamrolling everybody. We are going to have a fun Sunday show with a lot to react to from a busy weekend of college hoops. I am having a little bit of technical difficulties here as we go live, but busy weekend here, fun weekend here. And before we get started, do want to make a quick announcement. I am very excited to announce that for the third straight year, we are working with Bracket Fanatics and bracketfanatics.com on our NCAA March Madness pool. Sorry, we got a little bit of a lighting issue here, but for the fourth straight year, we are working with Bracket Fanatics and bracketfanatics.com. We are so thrilled to be working with Bracket Fanatics, and here is the cool part. Bracket Fanatics is giving us a $1,000 prize pool to give to all of everybody that's involved in the Aaron Torres Sports Bracket Challenge. So, bracket comes out obviously a week from today, but you can already go ahead and sign up right now. This is all you got to do. Go to bracketfanatics.com. Right on the side of the page, it says sponsored brackets. There is obviously the Aaron Torres pod icon there. Click that and you sign up and you're ready to go. You don't have to wait till the bracket comes out. You can do it today. You can do it this week. You can do it whenever. Again, $1,000 prize pool, $500 cash prize, courtesy of our friends at Bracket Fanatics. So excited to be working with them. Again, bracketfanatics.com, sponsored pool. By the way, if you have been in our previous pools, just sign up. Once you put in your email, all of your information will populate. So excited to be with them. By the way, there is a link in the show description as well, so you can sign up there. Should mention, by the way, we are also brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook. BetUS has been with us all of February into March and through the end of March Madness. We are so excited about our work with BetUS. And here's the great thing about BetUS. They have an incredible offer for listeners of the Aaron Torres pod. This is what you do. Download, go to betus.com. First 3 deposits. How about this? Not 1, not 2, but your first 3 deposits. A 125% sign-up bonus. Again, the link is in the show description on YouTube. The link is in the show description on the podcast. But first deposit, 125% on your first 3 deposits. So we appreciate BetUS and all that they have done. With that said, I got to say this, man. I've said it before. I'll say it again. There is no more time to waste. And so let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And as I said to lead the show, sometimes in this business, you get a weekend, you know what you're going to lead with, you all day, you get your graphics ready, you get your notes ready, you do all this, you do that. And those weekends are fun. But it's also fun when a huge breaking story happens in real time, basically right before you come on air. And that is exactly what happened with us just minutes before we came on air for this episode today, okay? So for people who did not see this, we had ourselves a major brawl in the South Carolina LSU women's game, okay? For people who don't follow the women's game, and I'll be honest, I don't particularly follow the women's game closely Not that I don't like the women. I respect the women. I grew up in Connecticut. One of my earliest sports memories was Rebecca Lobo, the 95 Huskies. So I've always respected the women's game, whatever. But, you get older. I got a family. I'm watching women's college hoops, or I'm watching men's college hoops, excuse me. We're doing football stuff into the middle of February. But I bring it up because what I can tell you is even before this game was on, it was something that I knew I wanted to watch. South Carolina is the number one team in the country. LSU's number two. LSU is the defending champs. And I caught a little bit of their first matchup in Baton Rouge probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And in that game, you could so obviously see the disdain and dislike between those two programs. Two great programs, two championship programs right now. And I say this as an LSU guy. They are the two top dogs. No disrespect to Caitlin Clark, no disrespect to Paige Beckers, but as a UConn guy, I think I just called myself an LSU guy, but as a UConn guy, I can tell you that these are the two best programs in the sport right now. Great players, Hall of Fame coaches, whatever. So I was watching the game on Sunday, even while the Missouri Valley Championship game was going on, even as, Austin P versus Stetson was going on. I kind of had one eye on the LSU-South Carolina game. And for people who are watching, with about a minute to go, absolute chaos broke out as there was just an all-out brawl between these two teams, okay? So for people, I'm sure you've seen the video by now, but the bottom line remains pretty straightforward, okay? Basically, it's late in the game. There's been pushing and shoving and elbowing and this all game long. And late in the game, a whistle gets blown. South Carolina has the ball. The girl from South Carolina kind of pulls away. The LSU girl kind of gives her a little nudge. And from there, a girl named Camila Cardozo, who is South Carolina's best player, comes in and just gives a literal two-hand shove right to this LSU player, okay? That is where the chaos began. That is where, by the way, fans jumped out of the stands, including, and again, this happened minutes before we went live here, but I believe it was the brother of one of the LSU players. But either way, brawl, fans jumping out of the stands, and oh, by the way, both benches cleared. And so it's chaos. It takes about 10, 12 minutes to sort it all out. And what we are left with is a situation where LSU and South Carolina, their entire benches are ejected. Camila Cardozo, obviously from South Carolina, is ejected, and the game was forced to end in a 5-on-5 situation. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on all of these rules, but what was wild, and this is when it got really crazy, was that on the ESPN broadcast, they briefly mentioned that anyone ejected would be forced to miss the opening game or the next game, which is obviously the opening game of the NCAA tournament. Now, they ran that back, and I think we're still, for people who are watching on YouTube after the fact, it's about 6:15 Eastern time right now, and so we're still trying to figure out all the details. But they kind of pulled back on that comment, and at first it felt like everybody that was ejected was going to be unable to play in the opening round of the NCAA tournament. It looks like they will be able to, but at the same time, it does look like Camila Cardozo, who again is South Carolina's leading scorer and rebounder, will not be available. And so I'm here to say, this is going to be the biggest story in sports when Sunday going into Monday. And I'm also here to say this. It was wild to watch in real time. It was wild to watch the reaction to. And I'm going to say something, I don't know if it's going to be popular or unpopular, but I thought that was awesome, okay? And it's not for the reason that you think. I'm not just here to see people brawl. And it goes without saying, I don't want anybody to get hurt, okay? Let's just get that out of the way. Whether we're talking Filipowski, court storming, brawls between South Carolina and LSU, I don't want anybody to get hurt. But at the same time, why it is worth noting is for one very simple reason. Why I loved it is because if you watch this game, if you watch the matchup between these two teams in Baton Rouge a few months ago, it is a true old school rivalry based on hate. And I think in this jersey swap, everybody's buddies with everybody. We all played AAU together. We all did this together. We all party in Cabo together in the offseason. You can tell that these two schools do not like each other. They despise each other, and there is genuine hatred between these two programs. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense, right? I mean, just think about it at the most basic level. Last two national champions, LSU last year, South Carolina the year before. Of course, if you remember, last year as well, South Carolina was undefeated. Many believe they were by far the best team in the NCAA tournament. And they go to the Final Four. They lose to Caitlin Clark in Iowa. And it's LSU that plays Iowa for the championship. That was when we had the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese back and forth. But it was LSU that won the national championship. And so last season, LSU had what South Carolina thought was theirs. They come into this game, an SEC title is on the line, and I am here to tell you, I know I keep saying it. I hate to keep reiterating and repeating myself. But at the same time, if you watch this game, it was chippy and it was a little mean-spirited, which, by the way, I'm okay with. I like chippiness. I like genuine hatred in my sports. But if you were watching this game, it was jawing after every play. Not every play, but you get the point. It was a lot of jawing. It was a lot of talking. I'll say this. The refs in the women's game let their players get away with a lot more than the refs in the men's game. I was telling producer Matt before the show, right before the brawl happened, I think it was South Carolina scored a bucket, or maybe it was LSU. I'm not trying to pick sides on who was right and who was wrong because both teams were just talking back and forth the whole game. But one girl got a bucket and got right up in the other girl's face. And I was like, they would never allow this in the men's game. Like last week, Cam Spencer from UConn hits a big three at Marquette. He turns and looks at the Marquette fans and is immediately teed up. And so I'm not here to say what's right and what's wrong. But at least in this game, they let these girls play. And again, the hatred is real. And so in this sports world, where everybody has to pretend like they're all best friends, and in many cases they are. Like, listen, I grew up on, I'm a little young for Magic versus Bird, but I grew up on, whatever, MJ versus the Knicks. I grew up on, you go through the list of Braves Mets back in the day was big in the NL East. Mets Yankees, that Subway World Series. Genuine hatred, I don't think we really see that anymore in sports. Like I said, I think in the men's college game, players just move too often. Yeah, everybody's leaving after every year. You don't like Duke, North Carolina was intense on Saturday, but it wasn't like this if you were watching both games. Same with Tennessee, Kentucky. So it was fun. It was entertaining. It was back and forth. I thought it was relatively must-see TV. Again, not rooting for anybody to get hurt. It does not appear as though that was the case. But man, oh man, oh man. It was intense. It was fun. I'm biased, but I hope we get to see these two teams play in the NCAA tournament. Tell you what, this is what I want to do. I do want to take a quick break. By the way, that conversation was essentially immediately off the cuff. Again, live reaction. So I apologize if I was all over the place. But I appreciate everybody tuning in. I appreciate everybody's support. So what we're going to do, take a quick break, get a word from our partners, and then from there we will talk about the men's weekend, including yet another dust-up in the men's game, where, of course, Kyle Filipowski, he had those tingly toes there trying to trip up everybody. So we'll take a quick break. We'll talk Filipowski. Why is there not more outrage? We'll talk some Tennessee, Kentucky, on and on. Quick break, word from our partners. Be right back.
America's favorite sportsbook and casino. Live betting and racebook. We're celebrating 30 years with a historic offer. A 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits. Plus 10% gambler's insurance. Get started today. BetUS, where the game begins.
All right, everybody. Hi, back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears. By the way, I forgot to mention something off the top, which is kind of important to this conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, or even if you're not watching on YouTube, it does say in the show description that Will Wade, the McNeese State head coach, will join us. Okay. So what we're going to do is something a little bit different here because of the fact that the South Carolina LSU brawl happened, I felt like we had to take some more time and get to some of the other topics. So what we will do is we're going to run the Will Wade interview separately on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast, just stick to the end because Will Wade will join us. And I'll be totally transparent with you guys and girls. He was awesome. We talked about this year at McNeese State. We talked about his time away from basketball. We talked about some stuff that maybe he had to he certainly had some thoughts on the transfer portal, the state of college basketball, NIL. But I will tell you, if you get a chance to listen, I think it will give you a completely different perspective on Will Wade at McNeese State. They're 28-3, by the way, and they will open the Southland Conference Tournament on their home court Tuesday. They need 2 wins to get to the NCAA tournament. Will Wade has been awesome this year. And again, I think you'll enjoy the interview. So if you are watching on YouTube, we'll run that interview separately. If you're listening on podcast, we will get to that in just a bit. With that said, let's go ahead and switch gears and let's get to the men's game. And I'll say this, a fun weekend for the men's game. And, you know, it was awesome. And we talked about this last week, but it's just awesome to see the interest in the men's game kind of grow and grow and grow as the season goes on. You guys and girls know I'm one of those guys. I watched college basketball 300, since the season starts in November. Okay. But to see people tweeting about the Missouri Valley championship game, to see people have opinions on Dalton Connect and Reed Shepherd is really fun. But the place I want to start is with Duke, Carolina from Saturday. Now, unfortunately, it was a fun game, not a very compelling game. North Carolina jumped out to an 84. North Carolina wins 84-79. They had a 9-point halftime lead. It never really felt like they were going to lose it. And so we'll get to some of the actual on-the-court stuff in just a moment. But at the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the biggest story out of the men's game on Saturday, which was, of course, the trip heard round the world from Kyle Filipowski. Okay, so Kyle Filipowski, not sure if you remember that name. If you're not a college hoops diehard, you probably learned it 3 or 4 weeks ago. To his credit, best player on Duke. But of course, it was about 3 weeks ago that the huge brouhaha and all the conversation about the court storming happened. If you remember, Duke loses at Wake Forest. Now, it's not Kyle Filipowski's fault. It's not Duke's fault. But as soon as the buzzer goes final, before they can get off the court is stormed at Wake Forest. Fans are running around. Kyle Filipowski, there's a little bit of a physical interaction. I don't think anybody actively ran into Kyle Filipowski on purpose. If anything, there's some videos that showed Kyle Filipowski maybe initiating some contact. But I bring it up because as soon as that happened, it was the outrage of all outrage. How can we have these court stormings? This is the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of sports. You heard John Shire go to the podium and say, this just has to end. We cannot tolerate this nonsense. And I'm not quoting him verbatim, but you get the point. Jay Billis was out on these internet streets tweeting and saying that anyone that steps on the court should be arrested. And Kyle Filipowski himself, he had a lot to say. Producer Matt, go ahead and toss up the tweet from Kyle Filipowski the day of the court storming, where Kyle Filipowski said, this gotta change. As you see, if you're watching on YouTube, the tweet, 1.8 million views at 4:37 on February 24th, 2024. So the last time we saw Kyle Filipowski, he was being carried off the court like Paul Pierce in the NBA Finals. Of course, as we remember, he played the next game. He was fine. He was basically dunking from the foul line. He had a sick dunk. And we thought that was where the story was going to end. But then a funny thing happened in Saturday's Duke-Carolina game. By now, you've probably seen the highlight. My buddy Nick Coffey put it out there first. That was the first place that I saw it, where there is a clear dust-up between Kyle Filipowski and Harrison Ingram from North Carolina. Kyle Filipowski, Harrison Ingram tries to get up. He tries to run by Kyle Filipowski, and Kyle Filipowski very blatantly sticks his leg out to try and trip Harrison Ingram, ends up tripping. Nothing ends up happening, but the video certainly made the rounds and certainly was interesting. And I think it's also worth noting that there was some even more damning video, in my opinion, that came out of Cameron Indoor on Saturday night. North Carolina, after the win, now they did do a little tiny bit of taunting, kind of did the Dalton Connect, point to the ring finger, give me that ACC championship ring. North Carolina won the game outright with that win. But at the same time, as soon as they did that, whether it was right or wrong, those Cameron crazies that everybody loves, the fan base that can do no wrong, well, they threw ice and they threw water at the North Carolina team. To which I say, arrest everybody. Throw them in a Siberian work camp. Send them out of the country. Worst human beings in the world. Start with Filipowski and send everybody else out. All right, I'm obviously being a little hyperbolic there, but I do think this is worth talking about just because I find it very interesting, the coverage of one side of things versus the other. Because when the Kyle Filipowski stuff happened, I put out a tweet and I saw, kind of other people in the media talking about it. And I'm not here to say what other people's opinions are or what they should be. But I saw a lot of, well, the only reason people care about this situation with Kyle Filipowski is because he's a white dude at Duke, and there's a history of white dudes at Duke doing dumb stuff. Grayson Allen, obviously, with the tripping 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was. Also, you could go back to Christian Laettner stomping on, what was it, Aminu Timberlake's chest. The Kentucky fans in the mentions can give me the exact name. I think it was Aminu Timberlake back in 92. That iconic game, Grant Hill to Christian Laettner. Nobody remembers except for Kentucky fans, Christian Laettner stomping on a Kentucky player's chest. So, there's certainly a history with Duke. But let me also say this. I'm not talking about this, in my opinion. I can't speak again for anybody else in the media. But I'm not talking about this because it's a white dude at Duke acting a fool. I'm talking about it because, as I said, I believe it's very interesting one type of coverage versus the other. Let's start with Filipowski, because why I'm talking about this is not because Kyle Filipowski did the worst thing in the history of the world. And trust me, I'm not going to pull a Jay Billis. To quote the movie Jerry Maguire, I'm not going to do what you all think I'm going to do and actually advocate for arrests or suspensions or fines or punishments or whatever. But at the same time, why it is a big deal is because Kyle Filipowski, when the court storming happened, as best we could tell, nothing really major happened. I thought it was interesting with the Kyle Filipowski thing, by the way. Thought it was very interesting. He claimed afterward, he said something to the effect of like, they targeted me, which I found really interesting because I watched the video from every angle. I didn't see anybody targeting anybody, okay? I've seen targeting. It's in the NFL. It's a 15-yard penalty. By the way, the part that never made sense to me in that process was the fact that who's going to target a 6'10", 240-pound monster that probably bench presses 300 pounds? I'm sorry. Forgive me. I don't believe that Tommy, the comms major, is trying to take a swing on Kyle Filipowski, okay? So I wouldn't really care about the trip. It wouldn't be as big of a deal, but it becomes a bigger deal because Kyle Filipowski made himself out to be the victim. Because Kyle Filipowski said, this gotta change. Well, if it's about your safety at Wake Forest, that's fine. But you can't then go around trying to trip people on the basketball court. Now, you could argue, certainly, that the court storming could have ended up much worse for Kyle Filipowski than the trip of Harrison Ingram in the UNC game. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter. We're either about protecting players from unnecessary stuff or we're not. Listen, there's going to be stuff that happens in a game that you can't control. I get that. But this wasn't an errant elbow. This wasn't two guys diving on the floor for a loose ball and one guy landed on the other's shoulder. This was intentional and it was egregious. Do I think it is the worst thing in the world? I do not. But if you're Kyle Filipowski and you claim to be the biggest victim in the history of victimhood, everybody at Wake Forest, Tommy the comms major, is out to get you. Well, I'm sorry, but the spotlight's going to be on you. And I do think we need to talk about it and we need to hold you accountable. By the way, you know who else? And by the way, to be clear, I'm not pulling a Jay Billis. I'm not saying he should be arrested. It'd be nice to get a statement from Duke because Duke was all about the inappropriate behavior of the Wake Forest fans. How about the inappropriate behavior of your player? Speaking of fans, again, did you see the video of Duke players or Duke fans throwing ice and water at North Carolina's players as they left the court? Now, again, to be clear, in the history of humanity, I don't think that a bunch of Duke nerds throwing water at North Carolina's players is the worst thing that has ever happened. I am not going to sit there and pretend that. But at the same time, listen, one thing about me, and this is why we have so many people watching here on a Sunday, why so many of you guys like me, as always, drop your questions in the comment section. But at the same time, the one thing about me, I hold everybody to the same standard. And so I can remember plenty of times over the last couple years that fans have acted inappropriately and the media has demanded something, punishment. I can go back to a few years ago. Remember that Kyrie Irving incident in the NBA playoffs? Playing for the Brooklyn Nets, stomps on the Celtics logo. You have a fan throw an empty water bottle at Kyrie Irving. The next day, you turn on ESPN, it's everybody on here. You have to arrest this guy. It's awful. It's the worst thing that's ever happened. Now listen, I don't advocate people throwing stuff on the court, but if you're going to do that, then if you're going to argue that player safety is paramount and you can't have fans acting a fool at Wake Forest, then again, I'm sorry. I have very little sympathy for Duke fans. This is one where I'd like to see Jay Billis hold the same standard. I'd like for Jay Billis to say, you know what? I called out Wake Forest fans for rushing the court and putting the player's safety in danger. Well, how about you call out the Duke fans for throwing stuff at North Carolina's players? Maybe he did it on the broad. Maybe he's done it since. I don't know. And if he did, that's cool. But I'm just here to say all I want is fair. And, all I want is fairness and equality. And I didn't see anybody getting triggered by the Duke fans. I didn't see anybody demanding arrests and suspensions and fines and whatever. And so I'm sorry. But to me, it is a biased world. And it's amazing. When the Duke fans do it, they're just passionate fans. When everybody else does it, including Wake Forest, they're the worst people to ever walk the face of the earth. Really quickly from the game. I mean, how about this? It's the final Saturday of college hoops. We're what? We are now 28 minutes into the show. We haven't even talked actual basketball. From the game perspective, I'll be quick because I want to get to some other stuff. I want to get to Tennessee, Kentucky, UConn, etc. But let's talk a little bit about the game. And a couple things stand out. North Carolina wins 84-79. I don't think there's an interesting take on North Carolina that I have not already shared, okay? So I've talked the same thing about North Carolina basically since the beginning of January. If you remember the beginning of January, they start 1-0 in league play. They play sometime in December. Then they have 3 straight road games to open January in ACC play. Well, I bring it up because ever since then, I've said the same thing about them. I like the pieces. I like how the pieces fit. I like how the transfer guys have come in and complement RJ Davis and Armando Bacot well, and none of that's really changed. Nothing really changed on Saturday in Durham. You look at North Carolina, not Paxton Wojcik, what's the other guy's name? Cormac Ryan, 31 points for North Carolina. That's one of those veteran transfers that wanted to be part of a winning team that decided to come to Carolina. Remember, Harrison Ingram, 24, 25 points in the first matchup. So for North Carolina, not much change. Now, I will say, with both Tennessee and Arizona losing, think that's where it gets a little bit interesting. I've seen a push to get North Carolina as a potential number 1 seed. I don't know that I'm there yet. Obviously, look, Houston, UConn, and Purdue are pretty much locked in as the ones. I'm not sure that I am totally ready to go there yet, But at the same time, I do think it'll be interesting going into champ week, because I think we all thought that if Tennessee won out, they probably had the inside track. Then they lost, and we thought Arizona was going to have the inside track. Then Arizona lost on Saturday night, and all of a sudden it gets much more interesting with North Carolina. Don't think I'm there yet. I still think probably if Tennessee wins out, they get it. Although SEC fans will tell you nothing that happens in the SEC championship game matters. So I think that's interesting and worth discussing. Credit to Carolina. What I will say really quickly about the Duke-Carolina game, I actually think the more interesting story, and I've said this many times, was actually in the losing locker room. And to me, the more interesting story is Duke. And for people who are probably just tuning in, have never heard me before, probably sitting there saying, oh, this guy Torres just hates Duke. Well, a couple things. One, I picked Duke to win the national championship in the preseason, okay? So no matter what you think about me, I thought of this team to be very good. And I did mention throughout the season, I said, this is the first time that I can ever remember. I said, is Duke actually being a little bit under-talked about right now? And I remember talking about this probably about 2-3 weeks ago. It's like Duke just keeps winning all these games. We're not talking about them. We're talking about Tennessee. We're talking about Kentucky. We're talking about Arizona. We're talking about Purdue. We're talking about Houston. We're talking about Kansas. We're talking about Iowa State. We're not talking about Duke. And so I kept saying, like, are we not talking about Duke enough? But the counter to me is this. I've said for weeks, maybe we're not talking about Duke enough. I've actually done a complete 180. And this game kind of made me reevaluate how I feel about Duke. Now, like I said, picked them in the preseason to win the national championship. Thought they were really good. But they lose at home to Carolina in a game where the ACC title is on the line. And I don't want to take away from Carolina, but it does make me reevaluate Duke. Because go back and look at the totality of their season. They're 25-6 or something like that heading into the ACC tournament. But if you look at this season, why was I down on Duke going into the year or going into conference play? It's because if you watch them in the non-con, you said, they're not playing very well right now. And so you watch Duke, they lost to Arizona at home. No, the final score was close, but Arizona largely dominated that game. They lost at Arkansas. They lost early to Georgia Tech. Now you get to ACC play, and you start looking around. The ACC is not good. They lost twice to North Carolina, clearly the best team in that league. Wake Forest, who's a bubble team at best, has work to do just to get into the NCAA tournament. They lost at Wake Forest. And so you look at the resume of Duke. One pretty nice neutral court win over Baylor back in December. Michigan State at the Champions Classic. Michigan State is a fringe bubble team. They're not really on the bubble, but they're not very good. Other than that, there's just not that much to the resume. They did beat Clemson at home by 1. I just wonder, is it possible that this Duke team is actually a little bit overrated? Because I said this on Friday's show. I think most of these best teams, I think most of these best teams realistically are teams that I think I think it's going to be hard to knock out Kentucky in the first weekend, Arizona in the first weekend, UConn in the first weekend, Houston, et cetera, et cetera. Duke's the one that I could see getting tripped up. I could see them being a 2 seed and losing to Florida or BYU or one of these mid-major teams, whatever. I just don't know how good they are. They don't really have a lot of great wins when you really break it down. I think it's possible they might be overrated. All right, want to switch gears, but I did mention this at the top of the show. For the 4th straight year, we are working with Bracket Fanatics on the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod Bracket Challenge. $1,000 in prizes. All you got to do is go to bracketfanatics.com, click the sponsored bracket button, and you will see my bracket. But what I also want to tell you is that on top of joining my bracket, the cool part about Bracket Fanatics is that you can start your own bracket and play with friends. And what's great about Bracket Fanatics, listen, we've all used the imposter nonsense, Yahoo, it's a clown show over there at Yahoo, okay? Bracket Fanatics, here's the cool part. Everybody signs up. If it's a pay pool, so if everybody has to pay $5, $10, $100, whatever, you can pay in the app. You can pay on the website. Everybody can pay there. So you don't have to chase down your buddies, your friends. If you're doing an office pool, you don't have to chase down Doris from accounting for $5 because her national champion lost in the first weekend. Go to bracketfanatics.com. And again, you can go ahead and start your own brackets. It's easier to use than all the competitors. Funds can be collected and distributed. And oh, by the way, on top of that, it's also worth noting you can make side bets with friends in the app. Bracketfanatics.com. You can start your own bracket. Obviously, join my bracket while you are there. Bracket Fanatics, appreciate their support. All right, so we're going a little bit long, and on the podcast, we are going to run the Will Wade interview. So I'll be quick on the rest of the weekend in college hoops. Tennessee, Kentucky. So I did a long reaction to the Tennessee-Kentucky game. If you missed that, you can find it on YouTube. But want to talk about this game because it was just a thriller. Kentucky, to their credit, they go to Knoxville. They win this game 85-81. And I am here to say this. Talks of John Calipari's demise were greatly exaggerated. Talks of Kentucky's demise were greatly exaggerated as well. Wildcats get the win in just a wild game. Okay, so really fun game. To Kentucky's credit, they came out, they dictated everything. They took the lead, they took control. Tennessee kind of battles back right before halftime. But Kentucky, again, they really owned the second half until about the final minutes. Really fun game. Dalton Knecht was unbelievable. 40 points for him, 27 points for both Reed Sheppard, 27 points for Antonio Reeves. And there was a moment in that game where it felt like it was just Dalton Knecht versus Reed Sheppard, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And from there, it got interesting in the final minute. If you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about. But Kentucky was up by 9 with a minute to go. If you watch that Kentucky Mississippi State game a few weeks ago, it was almost identical, with the one exception was that in that game, Kentucky actually fell down early and rallied. Kentucky never really fell down in this game, but Kentucky was up by 9 with a minute to go. And then all of a sudden, a team full of guards could not get the ball past half court. They almost end up losing this game, but they hold on and get the win. And it certainly was not an insignificant win, because with the win, you know this, Kentucky is now the 2 seed at the SEC tournament. Had they lost, they would not have gotten the double bye. They would have had to play on Thursday at the SEC tournament. Now they don't play again until Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. By the way, I know there's all sorts of promos and conversations in this show. I'll be in Vegas. We'll be doing post-game shows 11 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So make sure to tune in on YouTube, etc. But for Kentucky, this win is huge because now you get the extra day off. 3 games in 3 days rather than 4 games in 4 days. And you look at Kentucky, I think they're equipped to beat anybody in this conference. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think there's very many games in this tournament that they don't match up well with any individual team. Because as I've said it for weeks. I said last week, remember last week we ended the week, I talked about my 8 teams that I believe can win the national championship. By the way, cross Duke off that list. But at the same time, I put Kentucky on, and a lot of people kept saying, they can't win a national championship with that defense. It's like, I don't think it's likely. But look at Kentucky's resume now. 1 at Tennessee, 1 at Auburn, 1 at Florida, beat Alabama at home. In the non-con, had a couple very nice wins, beat North Carolina on a neutral. This is a really good team. And when you have that many guys that can beat you on any given night, I'm sorry, but you are capable of playing with anybody in college basketball. So I'm not going to do the overreactionary thing, but I do think it's worth noting. You watch this team, who do they not match up well with when they're scoring like that? Think the defense has to get a little bit better, but again, they can put up 80 on anybody, and don't tell me it's only because of this or it's because of that. Tennessee was number 2 nationally in field goal percentage defense coming into this game. Kentucky in this game shot, let's take a quick look here, 51% from 3, 46% from the field. So credit to Kentucky. Really quickly, I know it's not cool on the internet streets to give John Calipari credit. I give him so much credit for this season, man, because you lose that 3rd straight home game to Gonzaga. It was dark. I mean, dude, I try to be like in the middle, not too high, not too low, whatever. And I was putting out who's going to replace John Calipari list. And so when you look at that game, what stood out is that how much this team has evolved and how much they've got better since the middle of the year. Everybody pretty much is playing well. Now, the big guys did not play well on Saturday, but that's what makes this team so dangerous. Anybody can beat you on any given night. It was Reed Sheppard that night. Against Arkansas, it was Rob Dillingham. It's been Antonio Reeves. You just go on and on. And I think Cal has done an incredible job with this team. They're playing their best basketball. I also give him credit, and I tweeted this out. Like, he bet against 350 plus other Division I teams when he built this team around freshmen. Now, he has the very good veterans, Antonio Reeves, Trey Mitchell, etc. And they're not here without Antonio Reeves, Adu Thiero, etc. But at the same time, everyone in college basketball is saying you can't win with freshmen in 2024. Now, I've said the opposite. I said you can if they're good enough. And he pushed all his chips on the middle, and he said, give me the NBA talent, I'll figure it out. And he deserves a lot of credit because remember, Reed Sheppard, depending on what recruiting ranking, was a 4-star. Rob Dillingham was a fringe 5-star. Now, some recruiting rankings had him as a 5, but some had him as a 4. And so I just sit there and say, like, I think he's doing as good of a job as anybody in college basketball. I don't know. I don't know what else there is to say about that game. Really fun. Again, we had the extended clip on YouTube. Make sure to check that out. By the way, we also had a clip on the Kentucky commitment over the weekend. 5-star Carter Knox committed to Kentucky. So we have some reaction to that on YouTube as well. I want to move quickly here because we do have an interview with Will Wade on the podcast. A couple other results. The UConn game was unbelievable. Okay. So UConn goes to Providence. Remember, Providence is very much on the bubble. Providence very much needs a win. Providence is playing a home game at night in Providence. Okay. You know how crazy that environment was? How about this? UConn falls down 15-2. They fall down 15-2. Dan Hurley gets a tech, and it was a wrap from there. So how about this? They fall down 15-2. They end up winning 74-60, which means that they outscored Providence after falling down 17-2. They outscored them 72-35 over about the final, 32, 33 minutes of that game. And with it, and again, by the way, they were down like 13 in the first half. They were up 18 at the half. I've never seen a flip like that, and then for it to be maintained over 40 minutes. Beyond that, let me also say this about UConn. A couple things. One, what Dan Hurley's done this year is incredible because we all look at the 5 national championships. That's great. UConn has literally never had a regular season like this. Okay. So with the win, UConn's now 28-3. You know how insane it is to be 28-3 in any power conference these days, let alone the Big East? True round robin. This isn't, even I'm not trying to diminish what Purdue or Houston is doing, but Purdue and Houston play in 2 leagues where you don't play everybody home and away. So there are opportunities for an inbound schedule. UConn had to play everyone everywhere. So how about this? With the win, 28 regular season wins. That is the most in school history. On top of that, 18 Big East wins, obviously the most in school history. 18-2 in that league is just bananas. And obviously, when I say 18-2, most wins in school history, it's worth noting they haven't always played 18 games, but it doesn't change the accomplishment any less. Also, they earlier this year, number 1 team in the country for the first time since 2009. They're trending towards, by the way, first Big East regular season title since 2006, first outright Big East title since 99. So I could go on and on, but we're going long here on a Sunday. Credit to UConn for the win. Couple other results. Houston just disemboweled Kansas. I mean, there's no nice way to put it. It was really bad. And for me, this doesn't change anything I feel about Houston. I think they're probably right up there with UConn as, the 2 best teams in the country. I do think for Kansas, I mean, this is it. There is no justifying. There is no way to you just can't argue that Kansas is legit this year. Kevin McCullough's hurt again. He missed the entire second half. Hunter Dickinson, I haven't seen an update, but he is hurt as well. There's nothing else to say. They're not a good team. Let's stop pretending like they're legit. They're not. But credit to Houston. They'll be the number 1 seed at the Big 12 tournament. Kansas, for the first time ever, will be playing on Wednesday at the Big 12 tournament. Couple other results worth noting. We have 4 auto bids. Morehead State gets the automatic bid out of the Ohio Valley, so credit to them. They won on Saturday. By the way, knock on wood, hoping to get Preston Spradlin, their head coach, on the show at some point. Longwood takes care of business over UNC Asheville in the Big South. On top of that, we also had Stetson take care of business against Austin Peay in a very fun game in their conference tournament. Let's see here. That was in the A-Sun conference tournament final. Missouri Valley final was awesome. Indiana State and Drake. Drake gets the win. Listen, a lot of people were talking about it on social media. I agree with the conversation. I do believe that Drake and Indiana State both should be tournament teams. Indiana State is a very good basketball team. They deserve to be in. I would love to see them get in over some of these mediocre, power conference teams like a Texas A&M, like a Colorado, like a Utah, any team that you pick on the boat. All right, I'll tell you what. I think that's really it for today's show. Producer Matt, do we have any interesting questions? I know I went long. I'm sure a lot of them are on Filipowski, whatever. Indiana State 1-4. Listen, so Laren says Indiana State is 1-4 in quad one games. Okay, so I get that. What I will also tell you, and Will Wade and I talk about this, as a matter of fact. Will Wade and I talk about this, is you understand that it's basically impossible for these schools to get real games. And if they do, they got to go to your home court. You never get them on a neutral. You never get them at home. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to hold it against Indiana State that nobody will schedule them. When we talk to Will Wade, he'll tell you. He said, I could show you the text messages. We're trying to schedule for next year. Nobody will play us. Not home, not neutral, nowhere. And so I'm sorry, but if you're Texas A&M, if you're Colorado, if you're Utah, and you have a million shots at getting good wins and you just lose all these games, I'm sorry, I don't feel bad for you. I'd much rather see an Indiana State. They've been great essentially for all but 1 week of the year. They got ranked in the top 25, lost back-to-back games. They've been really good all season long. Hope they get an opportunity. What else we got? Anything else before we get out of here? You guys, by the way, I'll say this. You guys are going to love this Will Wade interview. This is good. Atten Woodsman says there's a cover-up currently ongoing. A lot of media involved on this flip kick. So he's basically saying it's a big media conspiracy cover-up that nobody's talking about it. Listen, I will. Because to me, I don't really care. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But one thing about me that I always tell you, I judge everybody equally. If Kyle Filipowski wants to be victim when, Jimmy, the comms major, whatever, what was it? Tommy, the comms major? I can't remember. If Kyle Filipowski wants to be a victim when Tommy, the comms major, brushes into him, 5'4" Tommy, then, we got to call you out when you're acting a fool with these fans. Atten also says ESPN looks so biased in this, not good for them. I agree. By the way, I shared the video. Jay Billis had some response on my tweet, which I didn't even get to. I'll read the tweet out loud because I don't really care. I mean, Jay Billis, he seems like a nice enough guy, but it's clear there's something going on here. Let me see if I can find Jay Billis's tweet really quick. Let's see what I can find here. It's a wild tweet, by the way. This is what Jay Billis tweeted back at me. I said it because I said Filipowski's trip is significantly more egregious than anything any Wake Forest student did to Kyle Filipowski. Will Jay Billis demand he be arrested? We'll be waiting. So Jay Billis responded at about probably 2 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. He said, is it significantly more egregious? It's not comparable. Trespassing on private property and a horse collar tackle in a football game are not comparable either. It was certainly a flagrant one, just uncalled and not reviewed. And he goes on, and he writes a manifesto, and I don't really have time to read all that. I just think it's either about player safety or it isn't. And if it's about player safety, and if you're going to freak out because Tommy, the comms major, dusted up against Kyle Filipowski, then I need you to be furious that Kyle Filipowski is tripping Harrison Ingram. So I think there's something to what Atten said. I apologize to messing up your name, Atten. I think there's something to be said. Something fishy's going on here. We got a big conspiracy theory going. Before we get out of here, by the way, drop any other questions, producer Matt. Reminder, Aaron Torres Pod Bracket Challenge, Bracket Fanatics. You can go ahead, click the link in the show description. Go to bracketfanatics.com, sponsored bracket. If you've been part of it before, as soon as you put in your email, all of your information will be there. So we're fired up. I might as well share it right now. By the way, for people listening on podcasts, this is going to be like a 4-hour podcast, so I apologize. But we will be in Vegas. Producer Matt and I will be in Vegas on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We will be broadcasting from Stadium Swim, circa. So fired up. We appreciate that. We'll be doing a pregame show every morning. We'll be doing a postgame show every night. So make sure you're tuned in. If somehow you're in Vegas, feel free to hit us up. We would appreciate your support. But I'll tell you what, I've gone on long enough here. What we're going to do, I'm going to sign off on YouTube. If you're listening on podcasts, we are going to throw to the Will Wade interview. And even if you're watching on YouTube, let me tell you this. The Will Wade interview is incredible, okay? So Will Wade joined me on Friday. They open their conference tournament tomorrow, and he was just unbelievable. He was transparent. He was honest. He talked about the LSU stuff. He talked about being at McNeese. He talked about how pretty much everybody, the perception that has changed around him when his team is 28-3, how he's enjoying coaching at the low major level, what it's like to coach in a one-bid league. So if you're listening on podcast, Will Wade will be joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, I am going to sign off. Appreciate everybody's support. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, click that little subscribe button. Also Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, whatever. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All for today's show. Cannot believe that South Carolina LSU brawl. Just cannot believe it. Shout out to Torrin Crane. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, UFN. We'll be back tomorrow with Hassan Diarra, UConn guard. Wednesday morning, we will do our conference tournament previews. And then starting Wednesday night, Viva Las Vegas, baby. Be back. If you're listening on podcast, stay tuned. Will Wade interview is great. Will Wade interview will also run on YouTube. Appreciate it.